The first thing the queen heard was not the blast, not the alarms, not the screams, but a soft human laugh that sounded wrong in a place built for gods, because it was the laugh of someone who had already accepted that nobody was coming to save him. And then the palace tore open like a wounded beast, and the ceiling began to fall. In the heart of the alien empire, where pillars were carved from starstone and floors were polished with the dust of conquered moons, the human named Kale stood alone near the edge of the throne hall, wearing a thin collar that marked him as property, his hands stained with ink from translating the words of rulers who never looked him in the eye. He was not a soldier. He was not strong. He was not chosen. He had been traded. A human prisoner offered to the crown as proof of peace, then used as a tool, then blamed when peace failed, and now kept alive only because his suffering made others feel powerful. He had once dreamed of becoming someone worth saving, but dreams did not survive long in the Empire's palace, where human lives were measured like fuel and tossed away the moment they became inconvenient. The alien guards called him Softbone. The visiting human officers called him Collaborator. Both sides hated him for existing between them, and Kale learned to speak less, to breathe quietly, to walk close to walls, because attention was always a prelude to pain. On the day the palace collapsed, he had been dragged into the throne hall with a split lip and bruised ribs, forced to translate a ceremony that declared the queen's reign eternal. While the council watched him like they watched a caged animal, the queen sat above them all, her skin like midnight metal, her eyes bright and cold, her crown shaped like a ring of blades. She was feared across systems, not because she screamed, but because she did not need to. Her empire moved when she blinked. Her armies burned worlds with calm precision. Kale had seen her pass through corridors, with guards kneeling and ministers trembling, and he had never once believed she could be harmed, until the air itself shook, and a sound like a dying star rolled through the palace. For a heartbeat, the hall went silent, as if reality was deciding whether to continue, and then the floor buckled, the pillars cracked, and the roof began to collapse in slow, cruel pieces. The first slab slammed into the far side of the chamber and shattered like glass, sending a storm of dust over the throne. The second hit nearer, and the royal guards did what guards always did when fate demanded courage. They ran. They ran toward exits. They ran toward safety. They ran toward the lies they told themselves about loyalty. Ministers screamed and stampeded like frightened animals, and Kale was knocked hard against a pillar, his collar chain yanking tight. He tasted blood and stone. He tried to rise, but the chain pulled him down again, and he realized with a sick clarity that the collar had been linked to a floor ring so he could not flee. Someone had planned this. Someone wanted a human to die here, because a human death was cheap, and it would look like an accident beneath falling ruins. The queen shouted orders, her voice cutting through the chaos, but her council did not obey. They backed away from her throne with terrified eyes, not at the falling roof, but at her, as if they had been waiting for this moment. Kale saw it then, the truth hidden behind all the ceremony. Betrayal had been sitting beside her every day, smiling, bowing, and sharpening knives. Another blast ripped through the palace. The throne platform collapsed. The queen fell with it, her body disappearing beneath a wall of broken stone and twisted metal. The sound she made was short, strangled, and real, and it pierced Kale in a way he did not understand, because in that sound she was not an empire, not a monster, not a distant queen, but a living being suddenly aware of death. Kale's first instinct was to freeze. Freezing had kept him alive more times than courage ever had. Freezing was what weak creatures did when the strong fought above them. He lay there as dust turned the air gray and chunks of ceiling rained down like punishment, and his mind whispered the same old lesson: stay small, Stay still. Survive. Then he heard her again. Not a command now, not a threat, but a rough breath trapped under weight, and something in him broke in a different direction. He did not stand because he believed he could win. He stood because he could not listen to that sound and do nothing. He grabbed the chain near his throat and yanked until his fingers tore. The metal bit into his skin. Pain flared white. The collar did not give. He looked around, desperate, and saw a fallen spear near a dead guard. Cale crawled through dust, coughing, his lungs burning, and dragged the spear back. He wedged its tip under the collar's locking seam and twisted. The first twist snapped the spear shaft. The second twist tore skin from his neck. The third twist finally cracked the lock with a sharp click, and the collar fell away, heavy and useless, like every promise he had ever been given. He staggered toward the throne ruins, each step shaking under the constant impacts above. And as he climbed broken stone, he saw the queen's hand under a slab, fingers clenched in pain, her blood dark and thick against pale dust. Her face was half visible, pinned beneath a bent beam, one horn of her crown crushed into her temple. Her eyes met his, and for a second her expression was not anger or pride, but disbelief so sharp it looked like fear. A human, the weakest creature in her palace, the one everyone mocked, the one her council used as a joke. That human was the only one still moving toward her. Cale reached the beam that was crushing her and touched it with trembling hands. It was too heavy. It was not possible. His arms shook before he even lifted. He could hear the ceiling groaning above, warning that more weight was coming. He could hear distant footsteps fading as the last of the loyal fled. He could hear, faintly, the council's voices beyond sealed doors, arguing not about saving their queen, but about who would rule after she died. The queen tried to speak, but only a breath came out. Cale looked at her pinned body and thought of his own life, of every time he had been left behind, of every time humans turned their faces away from his suffering because it was easier, of every time he begged silently for someone to care. No one had. He had survived anyway. He had survived like humans always did, bleeding and ignored, and he had hated the universe for it. Now the universe offered him a chance to become what he had never been, someone who did not abandon. He put his shoulder under the beam. The edge tore into his skin through his thin clothes. He pushed. Nothing moved. His muscles screamed. His legs slid on dust. He pushed again. The beam shifted a fraction, and pain exploded through his spine like fire. He almost laughed at how stupid it was. A human holding up an alien palace. A broken translator playing hero. But the queen's eyes stayed on him, wide, unblinking, and in them he saw a question that felt heavier than the beam. Why? Cale did not have a noble answer. He did not believe in fate. He did not believe in crowns. He believed in one simple truth he had learned in cages and corridors. The world takes and takes, and if you do not give something back, you become hollow. Breathe, he rasped, voice raw, not as an order but as a plea, because if she died, then everything that had crushed him would win again. He shoved harder, lifting the beam enough for her chest to move. The queen inhaled, and the sound was small. Under the ruins, it sounded like life returning. Another crash hit above. Dust poured down like rain.